More reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, May 21st is $210,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money. More reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
On Friday, May 21st, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $265,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $265,000.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, 30 metric tons of supplies from the UAE arrive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Caribbean Development Bank underscores its support for St. Vincent and the Grenadines recovery efforts. And Virgin Atlantic's inaugural flight to St. Vincent and the Grenadines rescheduled to October.
And in sports, in matches played on Tuesday in the VPL, Darkview Explorers defeated Fort Charlotte Strikers and Botanical Garden Rangers was defeated by the Soufriere Hikers. Hope International suffered a 3-1 defeat in Group D of the 2021 FLEUR CONCACAF Caribbean Club Championship. And Tamara Woodley is the Student Athlete of the Week, the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley Department of Intercollegiate Athletics announced on Monday.
Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Update.
Welcome to this week's edition of Roundtable Talk. This evening we are going to be looking at the impact on women of the eruption of the Soufriere volcano. To talk about that, in studio, Director of MARION House and Women's Activist, JEANNIE McDonald. We also have the Coordinator of the Windward Islands Farmers Association, WINFA, COZEL Fraser. We also have JHS graduate teacher and a volunteer in the relief efforts, C. LATOYA John DEROCHE. And we have the Acting Assistant Senior Secretary in the Ministry of National Mobilization, Gender Affairs, NAT'L. Good evening, ladies. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think I'm going to start off with the Assistant Secretary. Tell us what's happening in terms of the effect, the impact in terms of the quantitative figures that you may have. What is happening? How have women been affected at face value, to start us off?
Okay. Hi, good evening to one and all, to our listening and viewing public on VC3 Roundtable Talk. As Ms. Daniel would have indicated, my name is LaFleur QUAMMIE, the Senior Assistant Secretary Acting in the Ministry of National Mobilization, Social Development, the Family, Gender Affairs, Youth, Housing, and Informal Human Settlements. And by the very nature of the portfolio, we can see that this ministry is an essential service provider, especially in cases of humanitarian crisis. And the eruption of the Soufriere volcano is one of such. So from the announcement on December 31st of the effusive eruption, the ministry's disaster management plan, it was enacted, basically, whereby we try to put systems in place, plans in place, so that we can be able to cater for the vulnerable population that includes the elderly, the disabled, the children, the women, basically everybody in St. Vincent and Grenadines, and especially those 20,000 odd persons in the red zones, red and orange zones from North Leeward and North Windward. And what has happened since the eruption on April 9th to now, and as it relates to figures, we now see 6,653 households being displaced from the Soufriere volcanic eruption. That equates to 24,586 individuals. And what we have noticed is that 5,000 of this figure, in terms of households, they are sheltering in private homes. And we have 1,558 households in government shelters. So that's the figures thus far as it relates to the occupancy in private and public shelters.
Do you have specific figures for the number of women who have been displaced?
Well, as at May 17th, we have in the private shelters, we have over 13,000 women in private shelters. And that represents 60+% of the total displaced persons in private homes. And as it relates to public shelters, we see women occupying 30% in private shelters.
Okay, so that's the figures there that we have. In terms of children, do you have that breakdown as well?
We have some breakdown, and this is complement to the data management system that was developed in collaboration with the Ministry of National Mobilization, NEMO, and also the World Food Program. So we would have on a daily basis through the data collection center or the call center that is operated through NEMO, we're able to register families, and we can be able to have this collated and disaggregated data that we are able to share at this point in time. As it relates to children in private homes, we have roughly roughly 30%, no, not 30%, 10% of children, basically.
Okay, probably we'll come back to that later on when you find that. Jeannie, you're on the ground. What have you been seeing? What has been the impact as far as you can see?
Teresa and listeners, good evening. As far as Marion House is concerned, women have been even more vulnerable than they were before previously. Before, not even Soufriere, but before COVID. It's not only the displacement, but it is the stress and the stress management. It's continuous. The psychosocial impact of La Soufriere on our Vincentian women is extremely, extremely high. And it's not just the vulnerable, it's those of us who in leadership positions as well. Those of us who are supposed to be helping those who need help. The self-care for us is not there. You don't have time to self-care. You don't have time to focus or even to think about self-care. Work is to be done, and you know it has to be done. So the additional psychosocial issues are there. In addition to that, it is obtaining critical items for survival. Critical items for survival. From the level of Marion House, we operate, we are part of a group in Kingston East that is looking at the needs of particularly persons in the shelter, the evacuees in the shelter and in private homes, and the indigent poor in the communities in Kingston East. And it has been very, very difficult. Sometimes you yourself, the person, the individual, the woman who is dealing with the evacuee or dealing with the vulnerable, sometimes it brings you to tears. When you realize, you know, you are in your room, you're in your bed, you have comfort, you could go to the kitchen to eat when you want, you could go to the bathroom and so on. All that has made women's lives even more difficult. If they had financial issues prior and they had any social issues, it has been compounded. Very much so. And the communication that existed within and among families and among friends are like, as it were, non-existent. It's not possible anymore because everybody's in a frenzy. Everybody's looking to see what needs to be done and how I can do it, you know, how I can meet somebody else's need. So the additional burden, this additional support that women usually get is really not there.
LATOYA, you're on the ground. You have been very active as a volunteer in quite a few of the shelters. Tell us what you yourself have been observing.
Well, I have been involved. Good evening, everyone, to the listening and viewing audience. I have been involved in programs to directly impact the mental health of the women in the shelters. Persons who know me closely would know that mental health is very important to me for personal reasons. And so I am always concerned about what's going on in the brain and how we are processing all of this. It is okay to give the tangible support, but any program that I have designed to give assistance, I have made sure that it has encompassed a mental part in terms of delivery of those events. I have done about 15 shelters in terms of medical kits. So the ladies have what they need. I have done the food programs in terms of the boxes, although I think there must be a better way that preserves the whole dignity of having to wait for a box. I think I have a mental problem with that. The having to wait for the physical box. We must have a better strategy than that in 2021. And then you having to take what is in the box that is given to you as a woman who normally provides for your entire family and can make certain decisions and certain choices. But I've done the boxes and I'm continuing to do that. I was fortunate enough to do a Mother's Day program in my area, in my constituency, the East St. George constituency. And that area saw us doing all of the shelters. And in so doing, I insisted that all the mothers for that program got tested. That's a big thing for me.
Got tested for COVID-19.
Got tested for COVID-19. You know, I encourage them to know their status. You have to know where you stand. For a lot of them, that was the first time they were taking a COVID test. But I thought that that was important. I dressed up the place like if I had the kings and queens. And we had a grand time on Mother's Day. Because again, your mental health is important. You know, and on Monday, we had the opportunity to hand out 50 to 50 women, mothers, expectant mothers, and mothers with newborns, care packages for the mother to go down and have the baby, and packages for the babies. And with the help of the Consul General of Germany in St. Lucia, we were also able to hand out some cribs for them. So we had a lovely baby shower on Monday. and they expressed, you know, their whole gratitude. I've gotten so many messages and voice notes, how thankful they are, and they were also thankful for the way it was done. I think it is important during the La Soufriere relief efforts that we also focus on how we do what we do. You know, how we do what we do is important.
Okay, we'll talk some about that, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how the livelihoods of women in particular have been affected, and we'll start with you because you probably have quite a bit of farmers with whom you interact who have been severely impacted. We'll be back after this short break.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, 30 metric tons of supplies from the UAE arrive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Caribbean Development Bank underscores its support for St. Vincent and the Grenadines' recovery efforts, and Virgin Atlantic's inaugural flight to St. Vincent and the Grenadines rescheduled to October.
And in sports, in matches played on Tuesday in the VPL, Darkview Explorers defeated Fort Charlotte Strikers, and Botanical Garden Rangers was defeated by the La Soufriere Hikers. Hope International suffered a 3-1 defeat in Group D of the 2021 FLEUR CONCACAF Caribbean Club Championship. And Tamara Woodley is the Student Athlete of the Week, the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley Department of Intercollegiate Athletics announced on Monday.
Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Update.
Welcome back. Before we took our first break, I mentioned the fact that I'm pretty sure that lots of livelihoods have in fact been disrupted. From where you stand at your position at WINFA, what have you seen? What have you been seeing in this regard?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Teresa. You know, as you said, I work with WINFA, and our work is concentrated predominantly in the agriculture sector. We represent about 1,200 farmers right now who are mainly from the red and the orange zones. About 44% of our membership are women. And in spite of the fact that, agriculture is a high-risk sector when it comes to natural disasters. Every year we do preparation for volcano, for hurricanes, and for droughts and all these things. I don't think we were prepared for disaster of the magnitude that we had on April 9th with the volcanic eruption. And that it has significantly affected the livelihood possibilities for a lot of our members. As I said, we have about 90% of our members in the red and the orange zone, which are really high risk. Devastation that is really undescribable. And particularly for a woman, when we have these type of events, the impacts are exacerbated because of cultural issues and economic issues and otherwise. For example, in St. Vincent, for example, our women bear the brunt and the responsibility of the food and nutrition security of their households. A lot of what is produced is also used for subsistence agriculture, for production of food, for meals in the homes. Now, from one day to the other, all of that is gone. And to compound this matter is that we have a lot of small producers. And generally, when you have small producers, what you find, small producers generally don't have the savings to be able to make multiple investments to recuperate from devastation of this type of magnitude. So it's really heartbreaking, and it is necessary when we have these events to really look in. Jeannie would mention this, and I believe Lafleur as well, with those gender lenses, because really the event does impact the woman differently than it does the men. And we have seen that, That's an observation that we have made over the years that we have tried to bring to the attention of policymakers, but which has also helped to fashion, you know, the way we do our work and we execute a lot of our programming. We've noticed, like in terms of the volcanic eruption as well, what we're likely to see is a lot of women would stick in the sector. Men tend to be assimilated or absorbed in the other productive sectors quite easily. But our women, of that 44% that we're talking about women who depend on their land, on farming, either as marketers, either as actual food producers or agro-processors in the sector. They're going to stick around. The men are more than likely going to be assimilated in construction. Some might, and in a practical way, if you look at our society in St. Vincent, some might move on to transport. Somebody might move to the Grenadines, and it's a lot easier because they don't have the extra responsibility, even at the farm level, of taking care of the household, of the children. Men would move on, and the woman would just have to assume that type of responsibility. So the impacts are definitely different. The other thing that we notice is about this whole issue of access to credit is critical. To be able to rebuild, it's critical to be able to accumulate wealth and to really facilitate development. But every time we have a disaster and women lose all of their production, all of the income, livelihood possibilities, they find it extremely difficult to go to a commercial institution to get, say, financing to restart their farms. Generally because of whether it's land tenure issues, you know, the land might not be in their name, it might be in their husband's name, or they might not have those issues resolved, or because the sector itself is inherently high risk and it's not so easy just to get up from today for tomorrow and go back into production. But the point that I wanted to make, like with the volcanic eruption, which I'm noticing to be quite nuanced when you compare it to what happens with hurricanes and droughts, is that in this particular case, you actually have to sit and wait for this whole, the level of the ash, the concentration of the ash, to get to a level where you can actually start to replant again. And it is in an environment of a lot of uncertainty where you're not sure whether or not you're going to have further eruption. So it's a pretty dicey situation. You know, when you have other natural disasters, you could maybe go assess your farm and start rebuilding your life almost immediately. In this case, you have to sit and wait. And as the point you were making, you're talking about women who are very proactive, who are entrepreneurs, they're go-getters. If you look at the marketing of agriculture in St. Vincent, you know, we call the traffickers. That is a sector, a subsector within agriculture that is controlled by women for the most part. These women, you know, are very ambitious. They're not used to sitting around and just waiting, you know, for things to happen for them. So yeah, it's likely that in agriculture, we would need to have very targeted responses that would address the needs that we're seeing for the women. And we would also need, in the immediate, to have like responses that take on board some of those responsibilities, those things that they provide for, but also the fact that there is actually need for the day-to-day support, food and clothing, those things.
Okay. You mentioned the fact that women and girls are affected by disaster different than men and boys. Why is this so?
Well, a young man or a boy, a male, they can more or less sleep and function in different circumstances than us. And if you go to the basics, you want to go to the washroom, okay, use that as base.
I think too, because our women, although it's known the men are the head of the household, a lot of the women in the Caribbean carry the weight on their shoulders of making sure that their families are provided for and taken care of. And in a lot of these shelters, they do not have the opportunity to do so. So they are dependent on others to provide for them. And waiting for that to happen for some women, you know, is a struggle.
It's not only a struggle, it's for them, it's as though it's reducing their self-worth.
Yeah.
You know, it's making them feel less of a person. I have been accustomed over the years of my life as a woman to do X and Y and Z. And suddenly, I become as though I am incapacitated.
And that is why process is important.
Exactly.
That is why how we do what we do is important. Because the situation is already frustrating. And then you add the elements where you have to wait on the handout as opposed to getting involved in the process. So that is why the process is so important.
Yeah.
You notice, you mentioned the fact that there has to be a better way of doing things. People shouldn't have to be like waiting for a box. How do you suggest, or what are some of the suggestions you think?
Teresa, I've thought about this, and the option that I have come up with is perhaps distribution locations or points using a voucher system in different areas. The centralized system of distribution perhaps worked in the past, but in terms of the strategic manpower to get all of it done on time, it is virtually an unbearable task. The first set of boxes I delivered to households, those persons would have messaged me and I would have taken directions to get them to the households. First of all, it took 6 vehicles. You have to get 6 vehicles. We had to load up the vehicles and then getting there in terms of directions, come down this road, go by this. If a blue van is parked outside, if the van moves, you're in problems. Logistically, that can't work. Understand that an entire island of displaced persons is waiting on one organization to do that for them.
One centralized.
Decentralized. We have to decentralize the distribution of goods in order for it to function properly. You know, and perhaps smaller hubs that are zoned, that persons can get vouchers to once you're displaced. You know, you get your voucher, you go, and you pick up what you need. Because sometimes the items that are placed in those boxes, some persons don't eat them, but they need more of other things. So we have to think, this is 2021. You know, the idea of packing a box with multiple things and then saying,
you have
here
delivered.
you go. That could be quite frustrating for a woman who is accustomed to going in her backyard and digging up her sweet potato and going to the fish market in the area and getting her fish and making her meal. You know, one of the saddest stories I've had since I've been giving back the work, I was at the Kittels police station meeting with a group, predominantly women, to hand out some boxes there with Digicel. And I was chatting with the displaced and I asked them, how were you coping? And one lady from OWIA said to me, for the first time, she said, I am 73 years old. And for the first time in my life, I had to go to the market to buy ground provision to eat. And Teresa, the tears just, for me, I was like, okay, I buy ground provision. What's the big deal there? She said, I had to buy ground provision to eat. I need to go back home. I need to go back home. And you could sense that little action, the amount of frustration she's going through because of that. You know, and that is the cheaper version to the processed food that's in our supermarket.
Could it be she's a farmer who is used to doing her own?
I believe it's that.
Yeah.
She's accustomed to providing for herself.
Yeah.
But now she's staying with somebody. And she misses the taste of the ground provision because perhaps what we're giving her in the boxes is not what she's accustomed to eating. So she has to go to the market now to buy what she's accustomed to eating.
Yeah. And that is why, Teresa, we have decided from our level at Marion House is that we go into the camps, the shelters, and we are dialoguing with the evacuees themselves. What are your needs? We not giving you anything that you don't need. You tell us what you need, we make a list, and we talk to families. For example, at Dorsetshire Hill, you have about 7 different families. In Sion Hill, we had 8 families. So we went and we spoke with them, and everybody said what they would like. This is what we wanted. Remember, they're in the shelter, so they don't really need food, except they want to have some crackers and some snacks and maybe sardine or something that they want to eat. So we speak with them, identify their needs,
You involve them in the process.
and you involve them in the process. And based on what they identify, it's what we supply. They need mattresses, we find mattresses for them. And we haven't received anything from NEMO. So we have taken responsibility for doing this with the 7 shelters in Kingston East.
Okay, we'll talk some about that when we come back after this second break.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, May 21st is $210,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
On Friday, May 21st, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $265,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $265,000.
This evening on the VC3 News Update, 30 metric tons of supplies from the UAE arrive in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Caribbean Development Bank underscores its support for St. Vincent and the Grenadines recovery efforts. And Virgin Atlantic's inaugural flight to St. Vincent and the Grenadines rescheduled to October.
And in sports, in matches played on Tuesday in the VPL, Darkview Explorers defeated Fort Charlotte Strikers and Botanical Garden Rangers was defeated by the Soufriere Hikers. Hope International suffered a 3-1 defeat in Group D of the 2021 FLEUR CONCACAF Caribbean Club Championship. And Tamara Woodley is the Student Athlete of the Week, the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley Department of Intercollegiate Athletics announced on Monday.
Join us at 7 p.m. for these stories and more on the VC3 News Update.
Welcome back. Kwame, we haven't heard you in a bit. I think you wanted to say something about why women and girls are more impacted in the aftermath of disasters as opposed to men and boys.
I smiled when you made that comment because we often get a backlash when we make that comment from the men and boys. We know that natural disasters affect everyone, but what we want to emphasize that women and girls, they are affected significantly and disproportionately. And prior to the Soufriere volcanic event on April 9th, we would have been faced by the double whammy of COVID-19 and even the dengue fever, which they are still present here today and which still has an impact. And it further exacerbates the vulnerability of women and girls as to how we respond. Right now in shelters, whether it is public or private, women and girls, their risk to safety, protection, and even security concerns, they're heightened. Why? Because they are susceptible to violence perpetrated at the hands of a man, a partner, or even a family member, or even strangers. So that's why we say that they are disproportionately affected. And furthermore, when you have to take into consideration the needs of the displaced, you may think of it being general, providing food on a general basic. You have a basic list. But what we need to recognize that some groups have more different needs. For example, women and girls, especially those who are in the reproductive age range, those who are seeing their menstrual periods, those who are in the reproductive age, who may become pregnant and so forth, they may require specialized services or even resources so that they can be able to live comfortably wherever they are presently. And I also noted the comments of JEANNIE and LATOYA as it relates to the relief efforts. While our ministry, we are charged with ensuring that the vulnerable populations, they are taken into consideration in the relief efforts, we are also responsible for providing the food for those persons in the private shelters. What I can say personally, we are naturally reactive in nature, because I know I would have heard Teresa's voice every single day after the announcement on December 31st as to what to do in the event of an explosive eruption, what to pack, what items to have, non-perishable items to have at least for 3 days and so forth. And it was not really surprising, but I was alarmed when the declaration was made for the evacuation, especially for the red zones. You saw persons from the North Leeward community going to the boat on the wharf, and you see them walking with just their bare hands or just a plastic bag and so forth. Where's the 3 days worth of items and so forth? Bearing in mind that we know things are rough for persons and so forth, but we are living in an environment which we are prone to natural hazards. So we have to be ready and prepared for anything. I acknowledge what LaToya would have mentioned in terms of having a voucher system, having decentralized distribution points and so forth. All those things are being considered. The difficulty right now within the Ministry of National Mobilization, it's post 1 month since the eruption, and persons are still registering. Persons are still registering, saying that they are in private shelters. And what we are doing now, currently, with the support of the World Food Programme and our other UN partners, we are doing verification checks. So those persons who would have registered as being in private shelters, we have a call centers whereby enumerators are currently calling, because the intention was for them to physically traverse to the location and do a verification check along with a needs assessment to find out what other needs are required by the household, so that it can be able to hold them through the period until the all clear is given. And the primary needs list, they are food and water. Food and water. So that has been the focus of our ministry. Although from December, there was a plan. There was a community engagement plan. There was a vulnerability response plan, a child protection, a gender-based violence plan. But everything basically, not to say went out to the window, but they were sidelined because we were tasked with doing this thing to ensure that persons are taken care of. And mind you, I did say of the 24,000 persons who are displaced, or 6,653 households, 20,000 out of 24 are in private shelters. So that's the concern we have right now. And working with our partners, WFP and UNICEF and UN Women, they are coming on board. We're trying to see how best we can be able to roll out a voucher system that can take the strain off of the central government in providing food and other basic amenities for the displaced.
Okay, so that's part of the response by your ministry.
The ministry and the government in its entirety, basically.
Yeah, part of the government. Jeannie?
Well, Fleur, I'm glad to hear we are looking at the whole business of process, you know, and how we move forward with this, and what lessons we would have learned from what is going on now. I hear us loud and clear that the point you made that women have different needs, and that we socialize differently as well. And we have to be conscious of their safety and their protection. Whereas the male might be able to fend off. And we know that it happens all over, whether you're in a shelter or you're in a home, and a private home, you have the whole business of safety and protection that you have to address as well.
Yeah, and that is a very important issue as well.
Yes.
Yeah? COZEL?
Just on the point about systems, having appropriate systems in place that would really respond to the needs that we have at the time, and targeting or fine-tuning whatever the relief efforts are to ensure that they address the needs. One of the things that we have been doing at an organizational level at WINFA, we have been reaching out to households in the orange zone. So persons who have evacuated from the red zone or from the higher end of the orange zones, and who are within households, we haven't been concentrating on shelters because we recognize that there are a number of efforts dedicated towards the shelters. So we've been targeting households, but the farming households, the way we've been going about doing it, however, is to work through farmers groups. So opposed to the WINFA Secretariat trying to get an idea, like, you know, by calling around or like trying to make contact, what we do, we liaise with the farmers' representatives for each of the group in each of the areas that have been impacted, and they would give us a list of who their members are, where they're located, where they could be found, what their needs are. But what we've been undertaking as well, which is turning out to be a really tedious exercise, but is a necessary one, is this whole issue of data gathering. In the process, while we've been distributing relief support to the households, we've been really putting in the effort to capture the data. So on our data spreadsheet, you would find information like the gender breakdown in the households, like the head of the household, whether it's male, female, how many children under the age of 18, and girls, boys. And the objective of the data gathering, although it's really time consuming and tedious, is really to be able to better focus the intervention moving forward. So maybe the next relief effort that we give, we would know which households, how many persons are in these households, and what are the specific needs. So that the point that you're making, Latoya, of not addressing, you know, what the needs of a young girl is, you know, or of an older person who might be at the menopause level, or maybe a household that might have somebody who might be in need of, you know, pampers or diapers or whatever it is. Those needs are met through the database that we have. So I think that is really necessary, even in terms of how, and the process as well, the way we go about doing it is, I think what is lacking in St. Vincent now is that we need to learn. We can't wait until this thing is completed to look back and reflect and see who has the best strategy and how we do it better. It has to be a learning process as we go along. Let's see, like, maybe what the Girl Guides is doing, what Gender Affairs, what Marion House is doing. How do we adopt these approaches that might be a little different but might be more effective? So yeah.
Teresa, coming out of this, I would like to see women occupy a space at the table where decisions are made concerning disasters and how we manage disasters,
there are women at the table,
and how we move forward from this. You know, in terms of the rebuilding efforts too, I would like to see them involved in the process. And not
Agreed.
just women, but women who have been affected. Because the way I would see things is far different from a woman who has been affected, who comes from the red zone, who has lost a lot, who has to rebuild her life and a life for her family. I would like to see them take
At the
a
table
place
as well.
at the table that where policies and decisions are made.
Agreed. Agreed.
Well, you see, we can't only say we want to see a woman. You can you can see a woman and just be a ceremonial figure and not saying anything or making an impact as it relates to decision making. And Latoya, we have women in at the seats. We have the director of NEMO, who is a woman. We have the chief medical officer is a woman.
I'm not
We
just
need
saying
more
any
women.
woman,
We need
Lafleur.
Exactly.
I'm
we
saying women
need-
who have been affected by this.
right.
You know,
In
and
addition to
I
those,
don't want to
in
discredit
addition-
them. 1 minute. I don't want to discredit them, but I think we have some educated, strong women out there who have been affected, who can really contribute to the process.
Yep.
I am not discrediting that fact. What I wanted to say is that
Good point for
What
us
I
to take a
wanted to-
break. Good point to take a break. We'll be right back.
I have to write it down.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
The Super 6 jackpot for Friday, May 21st is $210,000. Super 6, more jackpot money.
More jackpot money, more reasons to play this game. More money for way. Super 6 a bigger jackpot game.
On Friday, May 21st, there'll be thousands of dollars to be won. A lotto jackpot of $265,000. A new home, car, or that college education.
Lotto, you have to be in it to win it.
Next lotto jackpot, $265,000.
Welcome back. At the last break, we were having quite an interesting discourse. Lafleur, you're developing a point. I don't know if you want to finish that off. And then we'll talk some more about how do we get women who have been directly impacted to participate in the rebuilding and reconstruction process.
Yeah, we were having an interesting dialogue as it relates to women occupying spaces on the table. The space is there. I think that some women rather sit or act from the back seat, being supporting actress, basically an actor, or being the logistician, basically. We have to be able to support women who want to occupy the spaces, support them even if they have to make a mistake and what's that, because we tend to criticize women a lot for every and anything, basically. So I understand that we need more women. Women, they're there. We need more women. We need women who they're not afraid of expressing their views and opinions and ensuring that their voices are being heard and taken into consideration so that they can be a part of the decision-making act, basically. that was just my point, because we would have had in the past women occupying spaces at the cabinet or parliamentary level, and they're just there as a, we call them a window dresser and so forth. We need persons that whenever you hear this woman's voice, the earth must shake or rumble, or they command the attention of everyone. Basically, that's who we need. And I know not everyone is born to be that way, because I'm generally. But I feel that if I need a change, I must be able to influence that change. And that's the mantra I normally take. Basically, I can't wait until somebody can be able to speak for me. I can be able to speak for myself and other persons, and even empower other persons and support them to speak as well.
Okay.
I think, the point is a valid one in terms of the representation of women. I believe what's happened to us this decade, because we've made so much advances in terms of having women seated at the table, is that we normally deflect and say, all right, it is not just about having a woman seated, it is about having a woman who is willing to express herself and to be articulate and all this. I don't think we could discount from the fact that representation does matter. And I think that's the broader point that we want to make. And coming out of this, that my view of the world as a woman who is in agriculture, who's been significantly affected, lost my livelihood, and has to rebuild from this, would be completely different than the woman who is sitting at the policy level trying to design a policy for me. And so, it's very important that we don't lose that point in it. That, and I think that's the point that you were trying to make. How do we have quality representation coming from all levels instead of the top-down approach that we've incorporated over the years?
And I think that is what we are being hurt by the most through all of this, the bureaucratic top-down approach. We have to get back to, recognizing that this is not about the positions we hold or the things that, we or the organizations that we manage in our society, but this is about connecting on a level with women who have been affected. And sometimes you have to take off the title and the position and just connect. Just connect and find out, how do we move forward? What do you need? Are you strong enough to come and give or speak on behalf of those who need a voice?
Yes.
I think the bureaucratic approach to this has been quite interesting.
We cannot afford during this century to consider top-down approaches anymore, or bureaucratic approaches. We have to involve. You have to be part and parcel of. We have to take the caps off and find out from these people, what do you think? What are your thoughts? How would you like it done? What would you like done? It's not our world only. They are part and parcel of the Vincentian Society, and we must listen to them, because they are the ones who are impacted at this particular time. And who best to come up with a solution, to come up with ideas than them.
Okay, so before we wrap up, Ms. Kwame, someone has asked a question directly of you. And the question is, do you think the privacy of women and girls in these shelters are sufficiently secure? If not, what do you think can be done?
Okay, what I can say is that on the 10th of April, with support from UNFPA, that's the United Nations Population Fund, and also UN Women, we conducted a gender-based violence safety audit in about 85 of the shelters. This was just an observational tool that, we would have implemented it put in the shelters, whereby we went to the shelters and we just asked the shelter managers basically 2 questions. The composition of the persons there, and the disaggregation as it relates to women and girls, boys and men. And the officers would, take a transit walk across the compound and made observations as it relates to safety and security in terms of the bathrooms, are they locked, if they're well lit, and some other questions or observations as to places where women and girls can be able to sit, safe spaces, basically, children as well. And we, through UNFPA, would have developed a report with the findings along with the recommendations. While I can't disclose everything because it's at the level of cabinet, we found that there are some bottlenecks or challenges whereby the safety is not where we would have liked to be. And I was just having a conversation with someone just this morning, whereby there are different rules and regulations in the public shelters, the schools versus the churches. Because what the churches are doing, they are separating families. They are separating the men from the women, and it creates this greater reduced level of security for the woman in some regards, and it opened up the risk for sexual violence and the breaking up of families and so forth. And we see that from the audit, there needs to be safe spaces for women and girls. Safe spaces whereby they can be able to meet collectively, where they can be able to share experiences, where they can be able to seek support and help from the shelter managers and other experts who may want to go into the shelters, basically. We also, with through the child protection or child development divisions, they are establishing child-friendly spaces within the shelters. Because, you know, as an adult, it can be frustrating more or less than a child. They're in shelters for 24 hours, basically, doing nothing. So the Child Protection Division, with support from UNICEF and also in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, they're creating some nice spaces. I see that Charmaine Barnwell from, she's a volunteer at Girls High School. She did it on her own, and it looked relaxing for children. We need to create spaces for women as well. And another thing that ought to be done, we need to have GBV specialists or response officers, all centers or all emergency shelters, so that people can feel safe and they have an avenue to report in any and all incidents of violence perpetrated against them, or if they witness violence. So what is required? Safe spaces for women and girls and also for children. We need shelter managers to be trained. We would have done training of shelter managers, but we need them to actually respond, because as it relates to child abuse cases, they are mandatory reporters. If they see something or suspect something, they have to say. They have to report it to the police, basically, and the wheels or the mechanism shall turn.
Okay, thank you for that. As we go forward, somebody's saying, Mr. Kwame, what is the answer to the question? I think she answered the question. The way forward, how do we involve women as part of the reconstruction, affected women as part of the reconstruction and rebuilding process?
I just think generally, like, we need to have systems, mechanism, processes in place where we support women, especially if we talk about agriculture. We need to support women to stay in the sector. We need to provide access to credit, technical expertise, technical support. We need to provide that type of facilitating environment where women could have the issues of childcare being addressed in a way that doesn't prohibit them or preclude them from taking active leadership roles in disaster responses or in any type of any facet of development. So I just think that is necessary, that we have to support women, and not just for the volcano response, but even as we face this post-COVID world. Because if you're talking about women in agriculture, you're talking about directly affecting your food and security needs, your nutrition for your children, your health, the health of your population. And you're talking about doing this at a time where the world is in shock and people are stockpiling, countries are stockpiling. It is anticipated that food prices are going to go up, we're going to have scarcity. This is not a time to be pushing people out of the sector. We need to retain as many women in the sector in their roles as food producers and, you know, nurturers and caregivers.
We have to do a lot of work after this. We have to do some retraining. We have to get women to see, our women have got to take a role, have got to put a part to play in the entire process so that they could identify exactly what their needs are going forward and develop strategies and methodologies to address them. Not for me or you, Teresa, or any one of us around this table to come to tell them what to do. In addition to that, we have to ensure, you know, remember years ago we used to have endless women's groups throughout this country. We need to re-establish our group, rebuild our groups, retrain our groups so that our women in the rural communities, whether they're from the red zone, the orange, wherever they're from, can have a critical role to play. They have a critical role and they must play the critical role. Nobody come to tell them what to do and how to do it. They must be able to plan their part, to be involved in the process, and to ensure that they have a decision. They make a decision in terms of the process.
LATOYA, you have the last word.
I think we need to readjust our thought process as to how we do what we do in St. Vincent. We need to ensure that out of this, our women are stronger, more independent. We are able to provide for ourselves. We need to ensure that the families that have been affected rebuild in such a way that when we look back on this entire eruption of the Soufriere volcano, we say, you know what, in hindsight, a lot of good came out of it. I do not want us to come out of this catastrophic experience worse off than we went in. We must come out stronger and more independent. We must respect the fact that although you may not have a position or a title, that you have a voice. That you have a voice and you are able to contribute in a manner that is progressive for our nation.
I think that's a perfect note on which to end this evening's edition of Roundtable Talk. Quite an interesting discussion, I think. Thank you very much, LAFLEUR QUAMMIE, JEANNIE Olivier, COZEL Fraser, and LATOYA DEROCHE John. Thank you, ladies, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. Do join us again next week, Wednesday, for another edition of Roundtable Talk. Good evening.